This episode of Inside Golf Podcast is brought to you by Inside Sports Network.
What's up, everybody? It's your boy, Boston Capital Twitter, Steve, on the Hold the Green podcast.
All right, we are live. Tapping birdie.
All right, Carson Young is here.
I bet Ludwig at 28.
Let's go. I bet
You
him
do
at,
too?
I bet him at 25.
Low sevens. I think there's some guys in here we like.
Harris English at 7,300.
I love Brian Harmon at 3.5% this week.
What's up, guys? It's producer Cam here. ISN is now partnered with Shorty's Golf. Shorty's Golf is designed to provide kids with the perfect introduction to the game of golf by offering high-quality clubs and equipment specifically tailored to their need. They offer custom sizes for various age groups, ensuring that the kids have clubs that are tailored to their height and strength. They feature fun, vibrant colors and lightweight stand bags that are easily adjustable. Each set features real stainless steel clubs, high-quality materials, and sturdy construction, making them long-lasting while providing a real golf experience. So go check them out, golfshorties.com. Use ISN15 at checkout for $15 off your purchase.
This episode of Inside Golf Podcast is brought to you by Inside Sports Network. Listen, if you are playing DFS this week, you want to have the best golf course information and the best ownership, especially the ownership piece. If you're playing the Millie Maker or a GPP next week, having the right ownership, it's a non-negotiable. You cannot be working off of bad information and waking up on Thursday morning with a lineup where you thought you had leverage, but it turns out you played a bunch of guys that everybody else is on as well. If you are by some chance listening to the pod and haven't checked out our ownership yet, give it a shot this week. If you are not pleased with the ownership, you can DM me actually, and I will personally give you your money back. That is how confident that we will nail the ownership for you at ISN. So yeah, join us this week. It's the US Open. It's one of our biggest weeks of the year. We go all out. I have been in the lab over the last 48 hours grinding this golf course. I feel very confident in the information that I will be able to provide about this golf course. I know that Twitterless Steve is on the same page. We have been having phenomenal conversations about the US Open in our Discord for the last 4 or 5 days. I mean, this is my favorite tournament of the year. I've been chopping it up with all of our members on the golf course for hours every single day. I cannot wait until this tournament gets started on Thursday. And obviously, you know, this podcast just kind of scratches the surface. The real magic happens in that Discord. It's the best golf course information you are going to get, the best ownership, the best community, a lot of the best high stakes players hang out there. And that's kind of what we love about the community, is that it's for everyone. You know, you can hop in there day one and say, I've never built a DFS lineup before. I want to give it a shot and I need help. And we will help you. Like, this is a place for beginners. You can also come in there and chop it up with some of like the best high stakes players in the game and people that have been doing this for a very long time and have a lot of experience, and chop it up with those people as well. So you kind of can get the highest level of information out there, but also it's really just a fun place to sweat as well. And every single week from Thursday through Sunday, we are chopping it up about golf courses. And this is really, for me, one of the most fun events to talk about. I love this slate. I'm so excited to dive into this slate with you guys on this podcast. And as always, we would love to have you as part of our community. So InsideSportsNetwork.com. You know the deal. I don't need to talk about it anymore. You know what we're providing if you listen to this podcast. So anyway, Oakmont. Actually, let's start here before we start talking about the golf course, because I've already talked a decent amount on this golf course in the podcast with Twitterless Steve. So if you're listening to this podcast and you've already listened to the pod with Twitterless Steve, you already have a sense of how I feel about Oakmont, right? And if you haven't listened to that podcast yet, I would encourage you to check it out. Steve does a great job. I think the information that I provided in that podcast is pretty damn good too. This podcast is going to be more about me solidifying my picks to win. A couple loose ends that I want to tie up on the golf course that I wasn't able to get to in the podcast with Steve. Maybe some more weather stuff, a little bit of an updated weather forecast and how I believe the weather is going to affect the golf course. And I think the weather is going to affect the golf course a pretty big deal this week, as it does most weeks, particularly at major championships when you are dealing with very, very thick rough that can become even thicker and more treacherous if it is wet, and also very, very firm greens, right? And this golf course in Oakmont is going to play vastly different based on how firm that it is able to get, right? The line that I kept coming back to in the podcast with Steve, and I also referenced this line in a podcast coming out tomorrow with Zach Blair, which is phenomenal. I really hope you guys check that out and enjoy the podcast with Zach, because we talk not just about Oakmont. Oakmont's a golf course that Zach has played a number of times and has a great appreciation for, because he's obviously not just, a great golfer that is trying to compete and win the US Open, but he's also an architecture junkie and an architecture nerd. So he goes into a golf course like Oakmont, in my opinion, a little bit differently than some of the other players on the PGA Tour that don't really care about architecture whatsoever. I actually think, and I told him this on the podcast as well as off air, that a player like Zach Blair, who really understands architecture and is used to playing golf on greens with a lot of undulation, right? Like Zach designed and created a golf course in the tree farm that has big, sloping, undulating greens that are really thoughtful and have a lot of internal contouring to them. He's just going to have an advantage because those greens that he's used to putting on at the tree farm, they're not really like Oakmont, but they're also not anything like the greens that you see every single week on the PGA Tour. And it's the same thing that we talked about when we did the podcast about Philly cricket, is that these greens at Oakmont, at Winged Foot, at Philly cricket, at Augusta for that matter, all of these golden age golf courses that were built by some of the greatest architects to ever do it in the Oakmont was actually built in 1903, but a lot of these golf courses were built during the golden age period between 1900 and around, we'll say 1935. It's just a totally different beast from what these guys see every single week on the PGA Tour. And we'll sort of dive in how to model that, because it's a I think I modeled it well, and I feel really, really good about the players that my model and my data is giving me this week. But again, it's just a totally different ball game than what we saw even at the last major championship, right? Like we think about Quail Hollow, and Quail Hollow for me was, from a dollars standpoint, my best week of the season, right? I think I had a 3x week in DFS, and I hit a big outright for 11 units on Scottie Scheffler. And the reason why I had so much success at the PGA Championship was not just because I got Scottie Scheffler right. Well, I should say I got him right in an outright bet, but I actually didn't play Scottie Scheffler in DFS. And that was the main reason why I didn't win more money, because my DFS lineups, while they did amazing because I had Finau, Keegan, Pendy, Harris English, and all of those guys at the bottom of the slate finished top 8. At the end of the day, Scottie Scheffler still won that tournament by 6 strokes, and I didn't have Scottie Scheffler. And you needed to have Scottie Scheffler to win the big money. Like, I did my best with the combination of Bryson and Rahm at the top, but you still, at the end of the day, were losing the big money to the people that played Scottie Scheffler, but then also played the best leverage plays on the slate at the bottom that I had as well. You know, like I said, Pendy, Keegan, Harris English, Tony Finau. The issue is this week, I don't think it's that easy, right? Like, all those guys, they're going to be around the same price. And I think in some cases, they're going to be double the ownership, right? I mean, in terms of the slate, there are some real mistakes for pricing. Okay. The guy who made pricing for DraftKings, and I don't know who it is, but he did some things that are like really wrong. Okay. Not like, oh, this guy's $500 underpriced. Like Russell Henley and Corey Connors, like them or hate them, are statistically 2 of the 10 best golfers on the PGA Tour. Even if you add the live guys, Russell Henley and Corey Connors in the data golf rankings are top 15 players in the world. And they're priced like they are, I don't know, the 30th or 40th ranked golfers in the world in the low $7,000 range. I mean, how many guys are priced ahead of Corey Connors and Russell Henley on DraftKings? There are 9 guys in above 9K, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Actually, 11 guys above 9K. There are 12 guys between 8 and 7.5K. So guys like Russell Henley and Corey Connors, they are priced like the 24th best player in this field. And I think they are closer to between the 12th and 15th best player in the field. I'm not totally sure how ownership is going to reflect that. But it's a really interesting slate this week. And every week at these major championships and at the PGA, you know, outside of Cantlay, who kind of murdered me from winning like big money, you know, if Cantlay had played well at the PGA Championship and even just made the cut, then everything that was the only thing that I missed on big time. And every time at these major championships, there's going to be pricing mistakes that result in really high ownership. And it creates a really interesting game theory question. I think the best example of this at the PGA Championship was like Keith Mitchell, right? And I actually think that Russell Henley and Corey Connors at 7.4 are more of an egregious misprice than Keith Mitchell at 6.2 at the PGA Championship, who ended up being like 20%. And you see it, you know, you saw it with Bud Cauley last week, the Memorial as well, where Bud Cauley was a little bit underpriced, although I don't think as egregious as Corey Connors and Russell Henley this week. And he was 20%. And when you have guys in the low 7K range that end up being 20%, that presents a really interesting game theory question, even if they are underpriced, right? Even if we say to ourselves, okay, these guys are $1,000 off, they should be in the $8,000 range. Well, it's also golf. And what happens if those guys stink? Then you are totally cooking with gas if you are able to knock off 20 to 25% of the field. So it's a fun DFS slate. There's enough mistakes in terms of the pricing where it's going to present some interesting opportunities. But let's talk a little bit more about the golf course before I give my pick to win and maybe discuss a little bit more about the pricing and the odds board. So Oakmont Country Club, I've talked a fair bit about this golf course in the past already with Steve, so I'm not going to belabor certain things, but let's just talk about the fundamentals of this golf course. Okay. We have had 6 US Opens at Oakmont, most recently in 2016, when Dustin Johnson won at 4 under par over Jim Furyk, Scott Piercy, Shane Lowry. Those were the only 3 other guys to shoot under par. Then in 2007, the scoring average was plus 3.56, by the way, which would be the hardest golf course on the PGA Tour this year by a healthy margin. Okay. And let's remember about 2016, the golf course was very soft. Okay. They got a lot of rainfall the week of, and that's kind of what is going to be in the forecast for this week as well. There's a fair amount of rain this week in the forecast at Oakmont. In 2007, however, that was a year where we didn't get any rain the week of. The golf course played a lot firmer and faster. And what do you know? Angel Cabrera won the golf tournament at 5 over par over Jim Furyk and Tiger Woods, actually. So, it goes back to that line that the head pro stated in the Golfer's Journal. Bob Ford stated in the Golfer's Journal podcast about how if the golf course is soft, it's going to be 5 under par. And if the golf course is firm and fast, it's going to be 5 over par. Okay. And where we are trending right now, as I record this on Sunday morning, is a fairly soft golf course. Okay. So I look at today, Sunday afternoon, and it's raining pretty much all day at Oakmont. And we will have people on the ground to confirm things. I think people vastly overrate like the freakouts from the practice round about people who are on site getting rough videos and stuff like that. If I thought that I was best suited and could provide the best information for people and my subscribers by going to Oakmont and being at the practice rounds, I would do that. I don't believe that I have ever needed to do any of those things. I'm going to take my breakdown and understanding of this golf course from my living room over anything that I can hear on site, outside of, the few people that will just ideally confirm for me the couple questions that I have during the week to make sure that I am on the right track. But for the most part, I do not want you guys to get super freaked out about hearing that the rough is wet and really difficult and guys are struggling out of the rough because the golf course is soft and the rough is lush and wet and it's hard to get clubs out of it. We know that. That is accounted for in my model. I am expecting that to happen. And if it turns out for whatever reason which I do not expect to be the case, like the changes that happen during practice rounds in tournament week to the GCSAA sheet, it rarely ever happens where a golf course that I spend a lot of time on mapping ends up being something different about it during the practice rounds that I have to account for and change. It's extremely rare. And do not worry if that is the case. I will have that information available for us for our subscribers. So definitely be in the Discord this week, because if there are any changes to how I feel about the golf course, we will talk about that. We will highlight that. Obviously, that will be a part of our Wednesday show. But for the most part, I know what this golf course is going to look like. We have had a lot of US Opens here. I've spent a lot of time talking to the members, and I feel very secure in what we are going to see this week. Okay, so what can I say that will end up being the most helpful on the golf course in terms of you guys getting the best information to make decisions with your betting card and your DFS lineups? And there are a couple takes, I guess, that I would make sure to highlight and talk about on this podcast in terms of like big stands and important things to keep in mind this week for the golf course that I personally think matter this week and I am valuing in my stat model. But a lot of the content that I've heard so far this week is pretty good. Like I haven't listened, and I haven't listened to everything. I've listened to a couple podcasts, but I haven't listened to stuff this week. And this can happen at certain major championships where I'm just like so far off what everybody else is thinking. Um, but I think I haven't listened. I guess what I'm saying is I haven't listened to a lot of stuff that makes me feel like I am viewing this golf course demonstrably different than the way that the market is viewing this golf course. I think that the market understands, and it's a shame because uh, it didn't used to be like this in golf DFS, right? Like there was really no understanding of golf courses whatsoever. And when we would go to a new place, it would be very viable that people that don't understand golf courses would totally miss on the golf course and be led down a path of taking players that I don't think necessarily have the right skill set that you want to be looking for optimally in your DFS lineups and on your betting cards. And I think from what I've heard thus far, and this is something that I would highlight as like the number one point, and it's common at US Opens, right? What I'm saying is not something that is necessarily totally new for US Opens, but that a modern US Open venue is generally defined by off the tee performance, right? This is Oakmont is not a golf course where the second shot defines your score necessarily more than the first shot does. Okay. And what do I mean by that? Is that the missed fairway penalty at this golf course is going to be so extreme that your score is so often defined by what you do off the tee, whether you hit the fairway or whether you don't hit the fairway, because the players that don't hit the fairway are going to be at such a disadvantage from a scoring perspective compared to the players that do hit the fairway, right? So there's a couple like big picture facts about Oakmont that I want to highlight on this podcast that I think will be helpful for people in terms of understanding the golf course. And I think the number one thing that I would say about this golf course is that I think it is defined by your first shot. Okay. And so what you do off the tee at Oakmont is going to be incredibly impactful to how you put a score together. Okay. And I think there are two ways to get it done primarily at Oakmont. And I think the player that ultimately ends up winning the golf tournament is going to be the guy that does the best job of combining both of these together. But I think Oakmont is a golf course where you either need in your arsenal to be long or extremely straight. Okay. And in terms of like the actual specs of the width of the fairways are pretty narrow. Okay. So these fairways are not demonstrably wider than winged foot. Even accurate drivers are going to miss fairways. Okay. Even on a soft golf course, guys are going to be missing a lot of fairways out there. I do not, just because they're narrow, and even with softer conditions, they're still pretty narrow. And I wouldn't expect the driving accuracy percentage to be that much higher than like 55, 60%. Right. So when you miss, so there are two real ways to gain a real advantage off the tee at Oakmont. Number one is just hitting the most fairways. Okay. And that's why there are certain players that I'm looking at this week where if you are hyper accurate off the tee, like literally the most accurate players off the tee on the PGA Tour, and you have the ability to lead this field in driving accuracy, you have a big leg up. a big leg up at Oakmont. So let's run through some of those guys who are just straight up the most accurate drivers of the ball in this field. Let's go to distance to the edge of the fairway. I think that's the best stat to measure accuracy on the rabbit hole, way better than driving accuracy, which is more of a binary statistic. But if we look at distance to the edge of the fairway, the most accurate players in this field are, gosh, I have to scroll all the way down. Okay, I'm going to talk about more of the relevant ones because a couple of these guys aren't super relevant. Zach Blair, podcast bump. Shout out Zach Blair. But really the guys that are more relevant for you, Aaron Rai, Russell Henley, Colin Morikawa, Lucas Glover, Corey Connors. Matt Fitzpatrick's actually been hitting a lot of fairways. If you want a sleeper a little bit farther down the board, Christian Bezadenhout. Sepp Straka is going to be a very popular selection this week. He is super accurate off the tee. Shane Lowry is super, super accurate off the tee. And then Daniel Berger, another example of a guy who's super, super accurate off the tee. So like those guys that just mint fairways at the highest rate, Berger, Lowry, Straka, Corey Connors, Lucas Glover, Colin Morikawa, Russell Henley, Aaron Rai. I mean, those are your accuracy merchants off the tee. Those guys are going to have a big advantage at Oakmont. All of those guys are viable. All of those guys could contend to win the golf tournament if they putt well. Okay. So accuracy off the tee really, really matters this week. Really, really matters this week, in my opinion. The missed fairway penalty is going to be the highest that we see all year on the PGA Tour. Okay. But the missed fairway penalty at Winged Foot was the highest that we saw all year on the PGA Tour. And accuracy didn't really matter all that much at all because the driving accuracy percentage was so low then that the accurate players didn't even have the ability to separate, and they missed all of the fairways too. It was a coin flip. I don't think Oakmont's going to be that way. I think Oakmont's going to give accurate players an opportunity to hit the fairways, okay, and separate with their driving accuracy. Now, the reason why I think that is because there's enough rain that you're going to be able to hold the fairways, okay? But at the same time, the fairways are also narrow enough that a lot of these super accurate guys are going to miss fairways too. And so what happens when you miss a fairway? Well, you want to be as far down there as possible because the rough is so crazy thick that you do not want to be hitting middle to long irons out of this thick rough. And so that's how distance gets tested here as well. And that's why I think this golf course, and this is one of the very rare tournaments where I have off the tee just as valuable as approach play, is generally because what you do on that first shot is going to be so impactful to your score. And that's not always the case at PGA Tour events. And I think also, I don't want to say that approach play is devalued, but you did get to a little bit of this was going on at Pinehurst number 2, where the golf course was so hard on approach that it was actually hard for great iron players to flex their muscles and separate. And, you know, Scottie Scheffler, for example, at Pinehurst, like he didn't have the ability to be aggressive. And this is the best case against Scottie Scheffler, but he didn't have the opportunity to be aggressive and play offense on that golf course because, you know, it was like the greens were so firm and fast, and Oakmont's going to be the same thing where it's like, you just kind of have to play very conservatively. And I'm not going to say it turns into a putting contest, but like Bryson did not just win the US Open because of his power off the tee. He won that US Open at Winged Foot and also at Pinehurst because he was an unbelievable scrambler. Unbelievable scrambler. Okay. And you look at Bryson, because Winged Foot's the most similar golf course to this, statistically, comparatively speaking. But you look at Bryson and he's second off the tee. He's first on approach. He's third in around the green. He's 18th putting. And a lot of the around the green stuff and putting, you can combine those together because, you know, there's a lot of lag putts he hit that count as around the green stuff when he was really putting. And I think he won that golf tournament by a combination of his power off the tee and his lag putting. And I think that's the formula at Oakmont again. These are big, giant, undulating, difficult greens. And I really think that you're going to have to really pick your spots in terms of where you can be aggressive on this golf course and attacking these greens. Like, there are some birdie opportunities on this golf course. You know, there are 2 drivable par 4s. There are 2 par 5s that aren't totally reachable, but you can have a shot inside 100 yards in. And, you know, a lot of the other holes on the golf course, a lot of the longer par 3s and the longer par 4s, you're going to be hitting approach shots to 50 feet and having really, really, really difficult 2 putts. And so I think the way that you want to break down this golf course and look at this golf course is that who has the ability to spike off the tee and spike on the greens. And don't get me wrong, I don't want to diminish iron play, because iron play remains the most important statistic if you're just putting a blanket statement at every golf course on the PGA Tour. But for me this week, I do not view this as a second shot golf course. I view this as the most extreme, difficult, you know, like it is driver putter, but like Harvard Business School driver putter. Okay. Like, it's not mindless PGA Tour golf. It is driver putter, I think, is how you win, but there's so much strategy. There's so much, and that's why, like, I think Zach Blair is positioned to do fine. I don't, you know, it's not like I'm going to go crazy on Zach Blair, but just the fact that he loves and understands architecture, I think is going to be massive for him, because there are a lot of guys on the PGA Tour that just aren't going to know how to play this golf course at all. And you see that from time to time at Augusta. And this is, in terms of like course knowledge and understanding of these green complexes are every bit as hard as Augusta in terms of like where you need to land the ball, and the fact that sometimes you need to land the ball 15 yards in front of the green and let it run up and take a certain slope to access the pin, you know, in the most efficient way. And a lot of guys are going to get that wrong and not understand that. And that's why I think that at the end of the day, again, it's like the most difficult medical business graduate school version of driver putter. Okay. And the driver can be accuracy or distance. I think that the guy that wins the tournament is going to have both. I think the guy who wins the tournament is probably going to be a player that ranks top 5 and off the tee and top 10 in putting. Maybe some of the putting stuff gets filtered into around the green because he's putting from off the greens. But I think at the end of the day, the best version of driver putter in golf is Bryson DeChambeau. I think that his driver is the biggest weapon in golf right now, outside of Scottie Scheffler's iron play. And I do believe on this golf course, on a US Open setup, that Bryson's weapon of driver off the tee is going to be more impactful here at Oakmont than Scottie Scheffler's iron play. When you combine that with putting, right? And I understand the criticism of Bryson doesn't have great distance control with his irons. Bryson doesn't know how to properly take advantage of the opportunities that he presents himself off the tee. And I think that's a fair criticism of Bryson. Like, you saw that quite a bit where he had a cheat code because he was the only guy in the field that was hitting the ball 330 yards in straight. And so there were a lot of holes where like he would have 80 yards coming in and he still wouldn't take advantage of it in the way that he needed to. I guarantee you he's worked on some of that stuff because that was so glaringly the problem that held him back from winning the tournament, was just like being able to I thought he had a great driving week and a great lag putting week at Quail Hollow. Like, I think that he did the things that he needed to do well to win that golf tournament, but he was just a little sloppy on the setup. He was just a little sloppy on the setup. I actually want to see where he finished at because I was thinking about this morning. Yeah, so at the PGA Championship, he barely gained strokes on approach and he nearly led the field in off the tee. And he was quite good short game and putting too. You know, he finished first and off the tee. He was the best driver of the ball in the field. 22nd in putting, 25th in around the green, 47th in approach, and he finished T2. And, you know, I don't, the thing that held me back was, you know, going back to back at US Opens. Okay. And I understand that that doesn't happen that often. But the USGA setup, particularly the modern USGA setup, is pretty unique and singular. And I really do think that it is a golf tournament under this version of the USGA that has found its identity as a golf course that tests driving skill more so than anything else on the PGA Tour. And bar none, end of story, period. No questions asked. Bryson is the best driver of the ball in golf right now. He might be the best driver of the ball that I've ever seen. And USGA setups just straight up test driving skill. They reward long and straight in a way that no other golf course on the PGA Tour or LIV for that matter does. Okay. And so I do believe that you can get a scenario with a player like Bryson, who has lightning in a bottle right now off the tee, where he is just, I mean, I don't know if they're going to like make that drive illegal or something, but he is so much higher off the tee. And this probably the reason why so many people liked him at Quail Hollow. And I walked away more impressed with him at Quail Hollow. Like I thought he was amazing at Quail Hollow. And I was terrified of him for every second of that tournament as a Scheffler ticket holder. And I think now he goes to a golf course that even more so, the difference off the tee between Quail Hollow and Oakmont is that shorter, inaccurate guys at Oakmont are just going to get fucked. And that wasn't the case at Quail Hollow. So Bryson actually had to beat more idiots at Quail Hollow because there were guys that were driving it short and all over the yard that could still find a way to compete at Quail Hollow. At Oakmont, if you suck off the tee, you are cooked. So, you know, he would not be the first to like find the US Open as his calling card. Okay. There are a lot of great players over the years that have singled out USGA setups and really ate on them. You know, outside of Brooks Koepka, you go back and Retief Goosen, Lee Jansen randomly, Ernie Els, Payne Stewart, obviously, Hale Irwin's won 3. Like that's the thing that's interesting about the US Open. This is why I do think that Bryson can win a third. You have a lot of guys that just figure out the USGA setups and they just win US Opens. Payne Stewart, Hale Irwin, Curtis Strange, Lee Jansen, Andy North, all these guys, Larry, all these guys won like multiple US Opens. So I do think it is a golf course that asks a very, very specific question. And the modern USGA setup asks the very specific question of, we're just going to test driving skill. And that's my biggest takeaway from Oakmont. I trying to give you the best information, the most concise information possible to help you create a betting card and a player pool that is successful and helps you win money. And I could give you, I could walk through hole by hole of Oakmont and explain to you the architecture and the flyovers and how influential this golf course was architecturally and all that stuff that I know nobody cares about. I mean, people, I think, just want to know what really freaking matters here. And I really think that driving and putting is how you win this golf tournament. And Bryson has the best combination of driver putter in the world. It's better than Rahm. And that was the tough one for me, trying to figure out, was Bryson or Rahm, because I don't trust any of those nimwits on the PGA Tour right now. And I think there are, it's a good spot for some of the guys on the PGA Tour. I'm going to play, obviously I'm going to play a lot of good players on the PGA Tour and DFS. I don't know who I'm going to bet as my final guy on my betting card outside of Taylor Pendrith and Bryce. It doesn't matter because I think Bryson's winning. But yeah, that's how I feel about the golf course. I spent a lot of time on it, a lot of time thinking about it. I haven't played it. I've gotten invited to play it, and I can't wait to go see it someday. It looks phenomenal. It's really distinctive. I mean, like I said, I think outside of Winged Foot, there really aren't too many comps. I mean, like, I love Oak Hill to death. I play Oak Hill almost more than I play any other golf course in the world outside of my golf course in LA. And Oak Hill doesn't have remotely the greens as Oakmont. These are some of the best greens in the world. The only green comp that you can have really is like Philly Creek and Winged Foot. That's how difficult and fast and undulating these greens are going to be. And I trust Bryson. I think I trust Bryson more than I trust Scottie on the greens. And I think more than I trust Rahm on the greens. And the best case for Rahm over Bryson is approach play, right? Is that Rahm is just a better approach player than Bryson. And what's so interesting about this golf course, it just doesn't, so many major championships and difficult golf courses test long iron play. And I actually don't think there are that many high leverage long iron shots on this golf course. I think it's really spread out throughout the bag. And I'm not looking at long iron play in my model, which is quite rare on a golf course like this. So, yeah, I think Bryson's going to win. It's really close with Rahm. I think Rahm's going to play great, and I love Rahm this week, but Rahm is not the driver putter that Bryson is. Bryson's the best driver of the ball I've ever seen. And I think with Rory, I'm not going to count him out. If Rory is like 10% in DraftKings, I may play the shit out of him. But it just seems like, and I think it's totally understandable, it just seems like he didn't have the juice coming out of the Masters that I think some people thought he would. And that's not super surprising. I don't think that's whatever. You know, he won the fucking Masters. He's a top 10 player of all time. I don't care if Rory does nothing in majors for the next 2 years. After he won that Masters, it was the best. That was the best golf tournament I ever watched in my life as a fan. He may just, you know, he may just lack a little juice right now, or be feeling a little bit. The air just feels a little bit out of the tires, and I don't. I think Rahm is kind of gearing up, and I think Bryson's already there. And obviously, Scheffler is going to be fucking really hard to beat. But I do think that there is enough variance on this golf course based on some of the lies that Scottie Scheffler. I mean, Oakmont is a fair, hard test. Like, it's not an unfair golf course, but Scottie is going to get fucked sometimes. Like, there are going to be a couple times on this golf course where Scottie misses the fairway by 2 yards and somebody else misses the fairway by 30 yards. And the guy who misses the fairway by 30 yards ends up being less boned than Scottie. And that may irk him. So I don't think Scottie's going to win. I don't. It's really hard to win 2 majors in a year. It's really hard to win 2 majors back to back. He's going to have to putt his ass off this week. And he's really straight and he's really long, but he's not like hitting the. Guess what I would say about it is, now, you know what, to be honest with you, that's bullshit galaxy brain with Scheffler. He's perfect off the tee for this place. I was going to try and concoct an argument for why the fact that like he's above average in off the tee or in driving accuracy and above average in distance slightly, and those two combined to make him like the best player in the field in strokes gained off the tee, where I would almost rather him be like number 1 at accuracy and number 100 at distance. And I don't think it matters all that much with him. He's going to drive the ball great here. But I do think he's going to drive the ball great here, but I don't really know how easy it is going to be for him to separate with his irons. That was another part of Pinehurst that is underrated, is that I don't, it wasn't just that like Scottie would get boned when he missed the fairway in the Wiregrass. It was also that he had to play so conservatively with his approach shots that like he couldn't be in the general attack mode that he usually is on these PGA Tour golf courses. You couldn't really attack that way at Pinehurst. And as a Bryson ticket holder, I'm praying that we get something similar at Oakmont, where you just have to be so conservative that it's really hard to go on the offensive. And if Scottie can't really go on the offensive and it just comes down to making a gazillion pars, then there's other guys who can make a gazillion pars on the PGA Tour. What's difficult about Scottie is he turns the bogey holes for him into birdie holes. But I think Bryson's winning. I do. I feel great about it. I got like 5 guys within 4 in Canada. So I've got a super robust outright card in Canada that could maybe get me through the finish line as well. I would love to hit another outright in Canada to get that momentum going for the US Open, but I feel great about this week. If you like this, if this, the ball knowing aspect of the golf course and golf DFS, if you like that stuff, you're going to fucking love our community, because this community, I've built this community for people that think that golf courses matter in DFS, that understand that golf courses is a really big edge in DFS golf. And I'm a huge game theory guy too. I love me some game theory, but it's not just about game theory. It's about golf course architecture and understanding how to model and advanced analytics. Okay. I believe in that very, very strongly. So if this podcast helped you at all and you want to be a part of that very fun, silly, don't take ourselves too seriously, but are very serious about winning money, InsideSportsNetwork.com. We would love to have you a part of the team. We will be firing on all cylinders this week for the US Open. I am so fired up. Good luck with your bets this weekend. Enjoy the rest of the Canadian Open, and we will see you next time. Cheers.